Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gerard Hastings. I'm Professor Emeritus at the University of Stirling in the middle of Scotland. And it's a pleasure to be speaking to you today here in Estonia, if only thanks to the circumstances by virtue of the computer network. I've been asked to talk today about the impact of the global alcohol industry on politics. It's a momentous subject, and we'll talk about some very deep issues necessarily. The way global business now works has become a very dominant part of the problems of our planet. If we think not just about the traditional areas of public health, such as industrial epidemics, of which alcohol is one, but also the impact on nature, on the way in which our lives are lived in the north of the planet versus the south of the planet, and of course the climate. I want to start then with a poem. It's a poem by an English poet. It's called Fascism, I Sometimes Fear, and the poet is called Michael Rosen. I sometimes fear that people think that fascism arrives in fancy dress, worn by grotesques and monsters, as played out in endless reruns of the Nazis. Fascism arrives as your friend. It will restore your honor, make you feel proud, give you a house, and protect your job. It will clean up the neighborhood, remind you of how great you once were, clear out the venal and the corrupt, remove anything that you feel is unlike you. It doesn't walk in saying our program means militias, mass imprisonments, transportations, war and persecutions. Alcohol multinational corporations, like all multinational companies, use exactly the same playbook as Michael Rosen is talking about. Okay, there is no physical compulsion, no truncheons or jackboots, but there is immense power. Power that comes from the ability to seduce, to tempt, and to create desires in us, the customers. And it works. We volunteer. We engage with them. In fact, we pay for the privilege of doing so. And so do our leaders. The question I then want to explore today is, why do we collaborate so effectively, so enthusiastically in our own demise? The quick answer is corporate marketing. And this is Noam Chomsky speaking 20 years ago now, emphasizing how dominant this is in our societies today. To an unusual degree, these societies are business run, he says, with huge expenditures on marketing. He's talking about the US alone, $1 trillion a year, a sixth of gross domestic product, to pay people the privilege of being subjected to manipulation and the control of our attitudes and behavior. So today then I want to start by examining this marketing. I then want to move on to look at the public health responses to this, and Estonia, I think, is leading the way in this regard. And finally, and most importantly, I want to try and get some of your thoughts, your reactions, your ideas, so we can have a conversation as well as just a one-way presentation. If we start with marketing, if you pick up a textbook, a business textbook, it will typically talk about the 4 Ps of marketing: the product, the price, promotion, and place. Well, what I'd like to do today is talk about an alternative 4 Ps for marketing: the practices of the discipline, the personality, the philosophy, and the politics. If we start with the practice, the most obvious and undeniable aspect of marketing is that it is everywhere. It takes many forms. It is at every surface we look at. Every part of our lives is becoming infected, corrupted with marketing of one sort and another, trying to sell us things, trying to tell us things, trying to convince us things, seducing and encouraging our desires. And this actually is only one part of the marketing effort, the promotional P that the marketers talk about. We also have to think about the product itself, which is carefully designed and honed to meet all our desires, to encourage us to consume. Everything devoted to that basic idea of encouraging consumption. The place, the distribution of the product, what happens at point of sale, how attractively it is presented, how cheaply it is displayed, what advertising is put around it at point of sale. Then, of course, there's the price itself. Price that can be manipulated in so many ways, from the simple one of just making it cheap so people can afford to buy it, ensuring taxes are reduced and the like, or more sophisticated tactics that can mean high price actually suggests to us that this is very high quality, very aspirational product to drink. And those price, product, place and promotion all come together to build a brand, a very evocative, very powerful emotional construct that talks to our hearts rather than our heads. All this activity, these four basic variables building into the brand, all are the subject of very careful strategic planning. And that strategic planning is based first and foremost on a study of us. The corporate marketer gets to know us as well as he or she possibly can, our every move, emotion, weakness, with the aim of them being able to put a pitch out which will spoil, flatter, coax and seduce us to get us on side. This gives them immense power. Furthermore, what they do to us, what they target at us, is matched for energy and effort with what they do for stakeholders. They study them well as well. They want to know their every move, their every emotion, their every weakness. Them too, they want to spoil, flatter, coax and seduce to get them on side, because they know the stakeholders can control the context in which our consumption takes place. So issues like taxation or licensing, in the case of alcohol, have immense impact on them, and they want to be part of that conversation. Again, it gives them immense power when they succeed in doing so. In this case, the emphasis is not on the brand, which is more of a consumer identity issue. This is about the company itself, its corporate identity, its corporate reputation. They want that to be as esteemed as possible. Because bear in mind, as COVID has demonstrated, stakeholders, the politicians, the presidents and prime ministers give the corporation its license to do business. Does this practice, all this effort work? Well, again, the quick answer is yes, of course it does. If you spend millions, billions of dollars encouraging people to do certain things, to consume certain products, they end up doing those things, consuming those products. And we in public health have a shed load of randomized control trials showing how it has successfully sold as alcohol, tobacco, junk food, and a range of other products as well. But you don't need to go that far, in fact. There's a very simple common sense way in which you can answer this question. Just think about something like bottled water. In the UK, we drink over 7 billion bottles, plastic bottles of water a year. And yet water comes out of every tap in the land, perfectly drinkable, perfectly decent water to drink, and yet we choose to pay for somebody else's water. Well, think of the smartphone. We must be the first generation to have paid for the means of our own surveillance, giving these companies data that the Stasi or the KGB could only have dreamt of. Or fast fashion, which has gone from being a seasonal calendar, changing our fashions with the seasons, to one where it's changed on a week-by-week basis. At massive cost to people working in the sweatshop factories of the Global South. Or the beauty products, which encourage us to obsess about our own looks. And as Wallace reminds us, if you start to worship your own body and beauty and sexual allure, you will always, always feel ugly. If we turn to the personality of the corporate marketer and the corporation, bear in mind that they are driven by the fiduciary imperative. This is the rule that compels them to concentrate on the bottom line because they are spending other people's monies. Corporations get their money from investors, so they're spending somebody else's cash. For that reason, they are enjoined, they are compelled to focus on returns to those investors. So they are utterly selfish in their devotion to that goal. And this, as Joel Bacon illustrates in his book, The Corporation, makes them essentially psychopathic. They're irresponsible, manipulative, superficial, lacking in empathy, with asocial tendencies. And they show no remorse. Above all, they have an enormous patina of charm, which overlays these malevolent qualities, so that they can make us feel good, even as our liver is being trashed, as our lungs are being trashed, and our pockets are being picked. And the overall effect of all this marketing that encourages us to do things that we know are not in our own interests, and certainly not in our planet's interests, is that our spirits, our souls, become contaminated by it. We are collaborating in our own destruction. And all this effort, personality of the corporation, is absolutely unrelenting. It's not a person, it's a construct, and it outlives people. And it sees every threat as an opportunity in disguise. The great example for that in this year of COVID is how the alcohol companies, as many others have jumped on the virus as a possible marketing opportunity. So Guinness then, it's not just about raising a class, it's about raising each other. And even though we can't toast physically, we can toast virtually. We aren't going anywhere. Or the Red Cross. This season, we are all one team. We are shifting our sports investments, they mean sponsorship, to help our heroes in the front line, using stadiums to host the American Red Cross blood drives against the COVID crisis. Using it to boost their own reputation, when in point of fact, they are just talking about their marketing strategies, which use sport to imbue alcohol with a phony sense of being somehow healthy and the sort of thing you would do if you were capable of any sporting prowess. If we turn to the philosophy, this begins to look pretty ugly, doesn't it? And it is. The philosophy is essentially one of materialism. That we satisfy our human wants by consuming stuff. Consumer orientation, satisfaction, excellent customer services, these become the issues of importance. We solve our problems by going into a shop and getting something over the counter. And this process is driving rampant inequalities. So chief executive pay has increased leaps and bounds over the last 30 years, far, far exceeding that for the average worker. And we sign up to this with our loyalty cards. We don't just not criticize it. We don't just demand that they change. We actually sign up. Yet we know this is madness. The aim, as Schumacher reminded a generation ago, is to produce a maximum of well-being for the minimum of consumption. And as Tolstoy in Anna Karenina reminded us, they continually get us to fall for that eternal error that people make in imagining that happiness is the realization of desires. We people are far more complex than that. And the politics that results with this greed and this psychopathy and this utter determination is equally ugly. It's about extraction of natural resources and the domination of nature. Think of what Shell has done in the Niger Delta. Think of the sweatshops of the South. Think of the conflict minerals in all our smartphones that depend on chemicals and metals coming out of countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo and depend on child labour and appalling business conditions. Or Rana Plaza. Our consumption is really the bastard child of colonialism. The marketing that goes with this is, as Thomas Piketty expresses it, part of the apparatus of justification, which in many ways he argues is more powerful than the repressive apparatus. One of the most appalling things about our dilemmas at the moment in the modern world is not that we're destroying the climate and nature along with it, but that we are okay with it, that we are joining in, we are enthusiastic participants in this process. And in the process, corporations have become some of the biggest and most powerful entities on earth, far bigger than most countries. Then into that, we have to add digital, the arrival of digital technology, which, has got some wonderful side to it, such as me being able to talk to you from my hometown here in Estonia today. But it's also got a very dark underside to it. This is Harris talking, a guy called Harris talking, who's an ex-employee of the digital world. He talks about the race to the bottom of the brainstem. It starts with techniques like pull to refresh. So you pull to refresh your newsfeed that operates like a slot machine. It has the same addictive qualities that keep people in Las Vegas hooked to the slot machine. Imagine a world in which priests only make their money by selling access to the confession booths to someone else. Except in this case, Facebook listens to 2 billion people's confessions and has a supercomputer next to them and is calculating and predicting the confessions you are going to make before you know you are going to make them. This, as academic Shoshana Zuboff explains in her excellent book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, means that we are now engaged in an elemental right to the future tense, as she put it, which is endangered by a pan-invasive digital architecture, which is there to deliver to the corporation, not chance outcomes, but guaranteed outcomes. They know how to tick every box that will get us consuming. So the aim now is not to dominate nature, but human nature. The focus has shifted from machines that overcome the limits of our bodies to machines that modify the behavior of individuals, groups, and populations in the service of market objectives. So if we return to Michael Rosen, suddenly it doesn't seem very far-fetched to suggest the same things are going on. I sometimes fear that people think that corporate marketing arrives in fancy dress, worn by spivs and con men, as played out in endless reruns of Dallas and Mad Men. It doesn't walk in saying our program means cirrhosis, drunk driving, crime, domestic violence, and vomit. So let's come then to the public health responses to this. How do we respond to something so multifaceted and so enormous and so powerful in this modern era? I think there are ways we can do it, and I think Estonia is showing us one way of doing this, and a very important progress it's making. The loi Ivan is an excellent starting point. As you know, it doesn't ban advertising altogether of alcohol, it just requires alcohol companies to tell the truth. Now, telling the truth is an enormously difficult obstacle for an advertiser to overcome. Because as we've explored, they don't deal in truths, they deal in hints and associations and images. They help us to feel things, they encourage us to move in a certain direction. They build associations and images. If you force them to stick to the facts, then big changes happen. Likewise, services to help people who have been the victim of overconsumption, surconsommation as the French call it. Dealing with issues like cross-border trade reminds us that this is a global phenomenon. And I think what Estonia is doing for alcohol could be ideas that could move way across the consumption progress. Supposing all advertisers just had to stick to the facts, that would be an interesting step forward. Bear in mind that changes in alcohol and beyond are never going to be a single outcome. You're not going to pass one act and that'll be it sorted. Like the industry, we need a strategic plan. We need clear goals and a means to achieve them. In Scotland, we're toying with the idea of a task force that would be set up to deal with alcohol marketing with a specific goal in mind, and that task force would remain in place until the goal was achieved. And policymakers would commit to meet its goals and do what needs to do for this to happen. Finally, it is worth exploring that this takes us way beyond alcohol. What's happening in alcohol is happening across the board. It speaks to all the commercial determinants of health: tobacco, junk food, gambling, infant formula. It talks beyond that to power and democracy. Who's in charge? Who's controlling what's happening in society? Why are we heading so helter-skelter towards the destruction of the natural world and the climate? And our children are set to reap a whirlwind. Why is this happening? We need to start asking these questions, coming up with answers. Above all, we need to think about the climate and where that is heading. So I'll leave it there. I would simply ask for your thoughts. I confess I have raised some big and powerful issues. There are no direct and easy answers. But let's start a conversation. Because as Dickens says in The Tale of Two Cities, we need to begin the spring of hope and get out of the current winter of despair. And we can do that with your ideas, your energies, and working together, we can solve these problems. So thank you for listening, and I'm open to questions, ideas, comments, anything you like. Thanks very much now. Goodbye.
My first question for you is about fighting. How it is possible to fight with the corporative marketing and with the well-known big brands? Can you share your experience?
Two or three thoughts. I mean, I don't for a moment deny that it is a big climb and it is a hard battle we have to engage. But first of all, remember that the power of corporations, even the biggest of these organizations, all comes from us in the first place. If we don't buy their products, if we don't frequent their shops, if we don't engage with their marketing, then they collapse. So that they are dependent upon us. So we do have some power. That said, as you rightly point out, these are very big organizations, and it is a bit intimidating to think about it. But I think there are two senses in which we can feel hopeful. One is, as an individual, I think we have to come to terms with what we're doing at the moment in life. You can think of this within the alcohol market, where we are consuming far too much and causing public health problems, or you can think more generally of the harm we're doing to the planet by our consumption as a whole. And I think we as individuals have to form some sort of contract with ourselves, come to some sort of peace and understanding. And if we start to think critically about what is happening, start to challenge it in our own minds, in our own hearts, then I think we can find some sort of peace, some sort of progress in that regard. It doesn't change the world, but it helps us cope with what is happening. But what we can also do is respond collectively. So we can write to our members of parliament, we can join protests, we can complain to companies. There's many things we can do to start changing things. And this will take a long time. It'll take a long time to improve the situation with regard to alcohol, and even more so if we think more generally. But you have to start. And we can and should do that. I think we are capable of it. And in order to live a full and fulfilled life, we need to engage these issues. This is what being a human being is all about. I hope that helps.
Thank you very much. Did I understood correctly that the person himself need to be critical is the one point, and then another one is that he needs to be also active, if it is possible to be active in the society against the big corporations, then be active and be critical for the messages.
Absolutely right. Yeah, I think as individuals we have to think about this, hard though it is and challenging though it is. As I say, that really is an essential part of being a human being, is to think about these challenges, but also in democratic societies, being in a democracy involves much more than voting. It means that engaging actively in that society. So yes, as you put it, get active.
We have also the one question from the audience, so I will read it. Is a minimum unit pricing for alcohol a good idea, in your opinion? And when Estonia toyed with the idea of implementing it a few years ago, but the public's reaction was that it would only enrich producers or sellers. How would you parry that?
Yes, I think I come from Scotland, so I've been heavily involved in the implementation of minimum unit pricing. Yes, it is a good idea. It is a policy that works. I think pricing is an interesting issue in our system. The way pricing works in most markets is that producers will sell their product for what they think they can get for it. We think all the time about the value that the customer puts on it, and we need to start thinking instead about the whole value chain. So who produces it, who gets paid along the line, who profits from this. And with regard to minimum unit pricing, the characteristic of it that was most popular, the initial reaction was, as in Estonia, that people didn't like it. They thought this would just A, make their own drink more expensive, and B, benefit big companies. But when it was pointed out, as certainly is the case in Scotland, and my guess is it's the same in Estonia, is that the principal beneficiaries of this legislation in the alcohol sector were the small organisations, the pubs and bars, who were being outcompeted by the supermarkets on price. It was them who it would help. When people understood that, they got all full behind it. It was a very popular move. But I think it's the old story with any social change. You have to take people with you. You can't do things to people, you do things with them. And you need to think through their perceptions of it, their concerns, their anxieties, and try and ensure what it is you're proposing, in this case minimum unit pricing, is explained, and they can see the benefits for them and their family and their community and their society. And it comes back to the first question in a way. You've got to start being critical and active and get people actively involved in the process of putting together a society that works, because the one we have at the moment clearly isn't working properly. And the only way we're going to rectify that, short of some sort of terrible autocracy, is if we all get active, get involved, get critical, and get engaged in bringing about a better way of doing things.
We have also consumer protection boards in the societies. Do they have any role in this particular issue?
Yes, I think they do. Consumer protection is an important process, and we ought to recognise in particular, I think, much more protection should be made available to protect people from not just the products themselves, but from the marketing of those products. And perhaps the biggest and most outrageous aspect of marketing and its impact on us is its impact on children. And the idea that marketers can market to anyone under the age of 18 who is both vulnerable and certainly by up to the age of 12 doesn't even know what an advertisement is, that is outrageous. And it's a massive civil liberties, a massive human rights issue that large corporations with massive resources and the ability to buy and deliver very, very powerful marketing activities of both communications and otherwise can do this to people who aren't in a position to defend themselves from these approaches. I think is one example. It's just one example of how I prefer to think of it not so much as consumer protection as citizen protection from exploitation.
We have already many different politics and policies. Example, the tobacco industries. Is there any lessons to learn if we compare it to the alcohol industries?
Yes, I think there's many lessons to learn, not least because an alcohol corporation operates exactly the same way as a tobacco corporation. I don't accept the idea that there's something exceptional or different about tobacco. It happens to be particularly bad for your health, but other than that, it's just like any other consumer product. So there's ample lessons that can be taken one from the other. And if we take my experience, which is particularly, it's international, but it's particularly in the UK, we have over 20 years, we've moved from a position where the government decided that they wanted to get rid of tobacco advertising to one in which we have eventually succeeded in doing that. But that's taken us 20 years and 3 or 4 different acts of parliament to achieve it. We started off banning advertising, and that took out all the mass media advertising. But at that point, the industry then piled all its promotional money into the point of sale, because they could still do that. They could still put, and so the displays in shops became more and more elaborate, more and more beautiful. The packs themselves became a massive platform for promotion. So we had to move in again, and first of all we took out point of sale advertising. Then we separately didn't think properly, because it's not just the advertising, it's the display. So the industry got around that by having very elaborate displays. So we had another act to get rid of the displays, and then we had again to act to get rid of the packages themselves, so the packages became plain. So it took us 3 different steps to achieve what, if we'd thought it through properly at the turn of the century, we could have done in one move. But it's the lesson from that, and it's a lesson that alcohol must learn very carefully, is that the industry will do whatever it can, whatever loopholes there are, whatever wriggle room there is, they will exploit it as you try and control their activities. So it becomes almost pointless to ask a question like, well, which media should we take out? Because as soon as you take out one media, one channel, they'll just move to another one. It's like squeezing a balloon. The air will just move around. So you need comprehensive controls.
Thank you very much, Professor Hastings. Best regards from Estonia to Scotland, and stay healthy.
Thank you very much, and best regards, and good luck for the rest of your conference.